Ding dong.
We're back. It is January of 2024.
Yeah, it is. Happy New Year, bud.
Happy New Year. As you can see, we're starting off real strong with Ella fighting a sickness, but
yeah, so just so everybody knows, I'm not putting on like a sort of jazz standard voice energy. I have asthma that gets flared up whenever I get sick, so had a little cold fever situation over the weekend, and now I can't, carry a sentence. Today in a meeting at work, I ran out of breath mid-sentence. So we're firing.
So if you just hear in the background like it's fine.
And you know what's perfect for this is doing a podcast.
It really just makes it better. Yeah. And I want it to be known I did not force her to be here. This is by her own accord.
This is of my own Jamie volition. Okay? I am here for one reason and one goal. I'm here for one united goal.
And that
is James Fraser.
Dear listeners, is to talk about the book of the day, which is Outlander.
Outlander. I'm so excited.
And you could not have been the more perfect person to talk about this with, because our own Ella lived the Highlander life.
I lived
for a while.
Well, can I just briefly, before we dive in, preface this? So, when did this show come out?
2014.
2014. Okay, so peak. So this show came out when I was a freshman in high school. And I already had just a random obsession with Scotland. And I started watching the first season and was just so 14-year-old girl, I'm obsessed. This is the best fucking show on TV. And then watched through the second and third season, and it just got progressively so bad. I gave up. I was I don't care anymore. I can't commit. And then I moved to Scotland for college, and obviously no human being in Scotland is watching Outlander or is ingesting Outlander in any way, because why would they? It's ridiculous. So then when you were oh, I really want to read a series with you, I was oh Lord, do I dare dive into my childhood obsession? And what I will say is, we can talk about the book, but just right off the bat, went back, watched some of the first season just to get my palate, ready. So bad. Truly atrocious, and I cannot believe how invested I was in this show.
But it's one of those, it's so bad it's good. You're
absolutely
just eating it up.
Did you watch? God. Did you and Casey watch the show?
So we are through the wedding episode.
Okay,
we watched that last night.
So we'll talk.
Oh yeah. Oh, I can't wait. Yeah, this was one that just came out of left field, and yeah, we just got to get into it.
Yeah.
So this is fun. So first of all, what are you drinking tonight?
So I actually have discovered a beer that's become my regular beer for the first time in my life. It is called Devil's Backbone. My brief note is, I have recently discovered that I really like Belgian and German beer. Those are my favorite beers. And I never put that together until I had this beer, and I was I think Belgian style beer is for me. But it's really good. It's made pretty locally to where I am in Central Texas. And it's incredibly high alcohol content for a beer. It's 7% alcohol, which is crazy. Nice. So, nice. Between the asthma and the fever and this beer, this is going to be a greit episode.
This will just be fun. Oh my gosh.
What about you?
Well, I'm also drinking a German beer, the Hefeweizen.
Der Hefeweizen.
The Hefeweizen from Vassen Brewing Company here in Richmond, Virginia. So
look at us with our little local beers.
Local beers. We're like craft beer girls.
Also, like, who are we? We're like, oh, we're reading a Scottish book? Perfect. Let's bring out the Belgian beer.
I was gonna do whiskey, and then I was like, we don't have anything to mix it with right now, and I was like, I don't think I can shoot straight whiskey on a Monday night.
God, you know what? An alternative to this podcast, and we're not going to do it because it'd be disgusting and I don't have it in the house, but an alternative version of this podcast should have been us just pouring ourselves like triple shot glasses of whiskey and just like slowly sipping it throughout the episode and forcing ourselves to like it.
Oh, that... Maybe book 2? Come back behind the paywall?
Electric Boogaloo? We just get crunk?
That would be so funny. Just like drunk reviews of Outlander.
Yeah. Literally, there are so many books in this series. It will happen.
All right. Well, this perfect lead in. So, yes, we read Outlander by Diana.
You try to say that last name.
Gabaldon?
Gabaldon.
You know what it is. So this book was, from here on out, we will be referring to her as Diana.
Yes.
Know that?
We shall.
This book was published in 1991.
Crazy.
So for this podcast, this is our classic. I'm just kidding.
I'm
just kidding. But
yeah.
It does qualify.
Yeah, ish.
My qualification of a classic is anything over 10 years old.
Great.
So,
super.
But it is book 1 of a soon-to-be 10-book series.
Jesus.
There are 9 books that have been released, and there's no news on the new release yet. But the 10th book will be the last book in the Outlander series.
Thank God.
Yeah. This book received a 4.3 out of 5 on Goodreads.
No, it didn't.
Sure did. And then as you were talking about, the 2014 series premiere of this same name, and it pretty much follows the book word for word.
Yeah.
Which is great. It's so fun. It did receive a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, an 8.4, so consider it's certified fresh.
This is
an 8.4
ridiculous.
out of 10 on IMDb. You have Sam Heughan playing Jamie.
It's Sam Heughan. It's Sam Heughan.
Sorry, Sam Heughan as Jamie, and then you have
Katrina Balfe.
Is it really just Katrina?
Yeah, it's Katrina. It's just the Irish spelling, I think.
Oh. Katrina Balfe as Claire.
Claire. I'm sorry, you're not referring to her properly. Her name is Sassenach. Okay.
Sassenach. Oh, God. By February 2022, development has begun on a prequel series titled Outlander, Blood of My Blood.
This is my announcement. It's me being cast. Okay, congratulate me, because I will be playing Jamie's mother in the prequel.
Oh, God, it's so good. Well, a little bit about Diana. She has served as the co-producer and advisor for the TV series. She holds 3 degrees in science. Not the science you would think. It's zoology, marine biology, and quantitative behavioral ecology.
Excuse me? From whence? From where? That's absurd. That's insane. I love her so much more now.
She's a native of Flagstaff, Arizona. Diana and her husband have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Diana worked a dozen years as a university professor before beginning to write her first novel, Outlander, in 1999. Through the late 80s, she wrote scientific articles and textbooks, working as a contributor editor on the Macmillan Encyclopedia of Computers.
Are you kidding me?
Founded the scientific computation journal Science Software Quarterly, contributed articles to tech magazines such as InfoWorld, and wrote numerous comic book strips for Walt Disney.
So she's a genius.
None of this has anything whatever to do with her novels.
She's a genius.
She's a genius. She's freaking awesome.
I'm like obsessed with this person. And then
Yeah.
she was just like, and by the way, I'm also going to write one of the most successful romance series in history.
And I was fully ready to be like, she studied Scottish history, got a doctorate in like the history of the Highlands, and it was just like, nah, zoology.
She's so intelligent that she was like, do you know what my pastime is going to be? Scottish history in the form of sex, in the form of porn. God, I love her. Oh my God, I knew none of this. This is incredible. She's amazing.
This is why we do this. This is why we do what we do. So, let's get into it. A little summary. And I'm sorry, we're going to be slipping in and out of Scottish accents as we go through it. Just terrible Scottish accents as we go through this.
By the way, I apologize to anyone who I went to university with. I'm so sorry. Continue.
Here we go. So the year is 1945. Claire Randall, a former combat nurse, is just back from the war and reunited with her husband on a second honeymoon when she walks through a standing stone in one of the ancient circles that dot the British Isles. Suddenly, she is a Sassenach. Sassenach.
There it is.
It's never going to come naturally. Anytime it comes up, I'll just point to you and you can say it. Okay, suddenly she is a
Sassenach,
an Outlander in a Scotland torn by war and raiding border clans of the year of our Lord 1743. Hurled back in time by forces she cannot understand, Claire is catapulted into the intrigues of lairds and spies that may threaten her life and shatter her heart. For here, James Fraser, a gallant young Scots warrior, shows her a love so absolute that Claire becomes a woman torn between fidelity and desire, and between two vastly different men and two irreconcilable lives. Here we go.
First question, is a single human being on Team Frank? No.
Casey, so we watched it, and he hasn't read the book, and
he doesn't need to because it's a word-for-word adaptation.
Yeah, so I was like, what? I was like, I'm watching Outlander. Do you want to watch with me? He's like, sure. So he watched the first 3 episodes without me. And then I was like, hey, are you... Well, like, I watched the first 3 episodes.
Oh,
he watched the first 3 episodes.
Okay.
So then I was like, are you on Team Frank or Team Jamie? And he goes, I don't know, maybe Frank. And I was like...
Oh my God. Casey is so a Frank guy, actually. Now that I think about it. Here's the thing. It's just like... I have so many complicated feelings about this book. Because objectively... there was so much of it that I was just like, this is unnecessary. Like, she would spend, like, 5 pages on, like, a tree. Like, it was, there was just this book is too long. It is too long. Your copy's, like, 800 pages. My copy's a little bit bigger. It's still, like, 700 pages. Like, it's too many pages. So much could have been cut out. That being said... like, there is an innate thing in me that I'm just like, yeah, the sex scenes fucking crushed. Like, you know what? Yeah, absolutely this hot Scottish guy gets it. Like, he totally... I understand completely.
Yeah. Did my heart flutter every time Jamie said, I would die for you? You are the blood of my blood, my wife? Yes? Absolutely.
It's so insane. Like, it's also so insane. Like, can you imagine sitting down and being like, great, she's a World War II nurse. She's gonna fall through a rock. Then she's gonna be in pre-Jacobite Scotland. And she's gonna fall in love with a Scottish guy. And yeah, he's gonna be really fucking hot. So get used to it. And then there's going to be something to do with witchcraft. And then for some reason, they're going to make it their plot to stop the Jacobite rebellion. That's where we're going with this. Like, it makes so much sense that Diana is a nerd too. Because my favorite parts of this are, like, when he goes to the monastery, and like when they start talking about the Jacobite history. I was like, it's the sex scenes in the history for me, dog.
Yeah, like first impressions, like when I first picked this book up, I was like, I don't know. I just like, it has everything that I want, which is a historical fiction. It's got the romance. It's got like a love triangle, kind of, which I love. And then, but just part of me is like, there's no way that I have listened to 12 hours of this audiobook and I still have 12 hours left. And then but then I come home on Friday night and I just like set my phone in the other room. 3 hours later, I've read 250 pages and I'm like, what?
No, that is
somehow
true.
I ate this shit up. I just like gobbled it up.
With a goddamn spoon. Like, it was my favorite thing to be like, oh my god, I have to read Outlander. Like, I can't believe I have to read this book. And then would like go sit there for an hour and be like, well, just read another 150 pages. So, oh my god, it's like so bad. But like in my head, obviously not. It's so funny because just every book that you and I have done, and by the way, the books that we're going to continue to do this month are so on brand me. But just every book that you and I have done is so like not this. It's like nonfiction or it's something historical or it's something just like fascinating about philosophy of life.
Yeah.
And then to read this, I was just like, this goes against every fiber of my being. And in the beginning, I was really holding on to not liking it. And then just as it went, I was like, I can't help it. I want them to bone.
Well, that was like last night we were watching the show and we got to the episode before the wedding and we were going to turn it off. I was like, I'm sorry, we have to pause.
I'm like, sorry, we must continue.
Like, this is like one of the best written like sex scenes ever. Just in the sense of like having Jamie be a virgin and having him like not really know what to do, but also know what to do. So it's not like not hot. And then you're just like, it's funny, but it's endearing. And you're just like, God.
It's really, I think that she like is very good at writing something that's like on the border of being absurd, but is still grounded in enough like emotional reality that you like buy into it. Like there are obviously moments where I'm like, Jamie, you need to calm down. Like him being like, I feel like God. I'm like, you gotta chill. You had an orgasm, babe. Like that's literally it. Like you've just simply gotta relax. But like, it is so funny because you do end up realizing like, oh, she's writing from the perspective of this guy who's like alive in the 1700s. So the fact that he's married this like proto-feminist like war nurse is blowing his fucking mind. He's like, it's such a funny combination. It really works. And I have to say, like, I'm sure we'll get more into the end of the book. We can keep talking about the sex scenes. But, like, the end of the book is my favorite part because I think that you spend so long kind of, like, buying into this, like, wild ride and this, like, ridiculous kind of, like, pairing that is so much larger than life. Mm-hmm. But when she, like, there is something so horrifying about Jack Randall, who we haven't mentioned yet, I guess is a crucial element in that, like, he's Claire's husband's Frank's ancestor, but he's also, like, this horrible Englishman who's, like, against Scottish people, period, and is just, like, super fucking abusive and is awful. But I think that she writes a really interesting villain in him, mm-hmm. and, like, having Jamie go through this, like, horrifying sexual abuse and like coming out of the other end of it in this monastery where it ends up being a lot of questions about life and about like what we're all doing. Like she kind of sneaks this weirdly fascinating like universal question in at the end, And I
Yeah.
found it like really intriguing because I think you spend so much of the book being like, this is absurd, I'm loving it because it's absurd. And then she has like the last whatever 100 pages dedicated to this very real, very intense kind of experience that they both go through. And that personally was my favorite part, because it's like, yeah, I loved the sex scenes, but I really loved when they kind of like, Diana was kind of willing to like drop the act and just like delve into like who these characters are as people and like why they work despite whatever the chaos around them is.
Yeah, I think you bring up such an interesting point, because like the scene of Claire going to the altar with the monk and priest,
Friar, I don't know.
Friar?
He's doing something with the
a
Lord.
religious man.
A religious.
A religious man. But she, she's kind of like, I don't believe in God. Like, I'm not like a Christian. I'm not, I don't pray. I don't do any of that. But she goes to the altar anyways, and she just sits there and has this moment of reflection and this moment of like internal questioning. And like, I just thought, because you have the part where she tells Jamie everything, and Jamie takes her to Craignadoon, and he's like, go back if you want, like you should go back to your life. And then she decides to go with him, which like, yes. But she has you kind of like have that storyline where you're like, yeah, okay, I can like see her choosing to stay with him. There's like a little bit of that questioning, but then you really have that question of humanity of like, do I stay and fight for this man who has lost so much of his humanity in these last couple of days? And do I stay on this path of history where I could have a chance to almost rewrite history, and put my life in danger? Or do I go back to the life that I knew before, yet you just know internally, like, that's not going to be the same? Like, how can you go back to this life married to this man who reminds you of this man that just abused another love of your life?
Yeah, I mean, so much of me just wanted to make a joke and go, when the dick that good. But aside from that, well, a little bit. No, but I mean, like, I will say, like, it's so funny to talk about this book so seriously, because obviously, like, the first instinct is to be like, lol, 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 people think she's a witch, like, she got vaccinated for smallpox, and, like, it's just, but I will say that, like, it is such an interesting quandary, because it's like, okay, let's say that time travel had the potential to be real. You're out of you're out of what you know completely, but it doesn't make you less human. Yeah. And therefore you're still required to have human connection and to like adapt yourself and be a part of this. And she sort of at that moment at Craignadoon has this realization of like, I think I could actually be happier living in this than I ever was in my current existence.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. I mean, and also like, I don't know, just going back to the monastery and like that moment of silence, because so much of the book ends up being about like, it's so much about like violence or sex, or it's just like all these very big things that happen one right after the other. Having the book end on this note of like really like a lot of peace and calm and healing, it was really, I think, intelligent. And also it makes sense that this is a person who wrote this who is so dedicated to research, because the world is so lived in. It's not like she just sat there and like went on Wikipedia and was like, what was the Jacobite rebellion? She like really makes an effort to say like, okay, well, if he had been hurt, he would have gone to a monastery. How would he have gone to a monastery? He would have known somebody who was a monk. How would he have known somebody who's a monk? They were related to him. Like, she really thought through every aspect of it. And I think it makes this very outlandish, not, pun not intended, this very outlandish story rooted in some kind of like tangibility that you can attach to. So it doesn't, because I think like usually my issue with fantasy is I just cannot, I can't get like attached to like fairies and pixies and goblins and all of that. I have a really hard time with it. But so I think this was a good happy medium for me, where it was rooted in enough historical reality that I could buy into it and still enjoy the parts that were silly and ridiculous and big.
I don't know, the way she writes her characters are so freaking good. And like
Yeah.
I'm all for like character building. And I think having Claire rooted in the 1940s, right after World War II, like she could have easily rooted her in 1980 or 1970, but having her rooted in 1940s, where she was caring for these crazy war wounds without a lot of help, without a lot of supplies, without like a lot of knowledge, I think applied really well to her abilities to handle these Scots and like what the injuries they were going through, which I also felt like, again, rooted it in something real. Like if I went back to 18th century Scotland and somebody got shot in the leg with a musket, I'd be like, sorry.
Tough titties.
Yeah. Anybody got penicillin? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
It is really interesting. And I think it also is commendable, like the juxtaposition. It's not my favorite part of the book, but I think it's interesting, the juxtaposition with Gaelish, who she discovers is somebody who is from 1960, I think 8 or 67, and she ends up, Gaelish ends up getting burned at the stake for being a witch. And I think it speaks to like the values of what time people have come from, right? Because obviously you would assume that Gaelish is from a time when women, there's the free love thing, there's the hippie thing, there's like kind of a lot of, I don't know, trusting one another and optimism and peace and all that. And so you kind of get the naivete of Gaelish, like she's willing to experiment. And because she's following love and she's following optimism in her heart, she kind of suffers for it hugely. Whereas Claire, who's from this time of, you kind of like keep your head down, you do the work, you don't do anything that would put you in danger or at a risk, you use practicality above all. It is an interesting point. Like she would get through it faster. That being said, Jamie saves her ass a bunch, but also she saves Jamie's ass a bunch. So I guess it's equivalent. The thing is at a certain point, I think I found myself being very judgmental and being like, oh, this is ridiculous, or oh, this wouldn't happen, or blah, blah, blah. But then I thought to myself, like, this is a really hard task to write a book this long and that's so out of reality, that's engaging and actually is somewhat informative of people's psyches at a time that you don't usually uncover, at a place you don't usually uncover. Like, I don't think about Jacobite Scotland often. It's not really on my brain a lot.
It's not the Roman Empire.
Yeah, it's not my Roman Empire. It's a real feat. And I think that like the fact that she created a movement out of it and she's on 10 books of it shows you that, yeah, she did a hell of a job character building and world building, and it shows. Like I have to really pat her on the back for that. That someone who like is really, I'm super skeptical of this kind of thing, and I was drawn in because she did the work and she built characters who were interesting and she did the historical work.
Yeah. And I think it, like you were saying earlier, it's, God, I know, I'm just such a sucker for like if somebody can really build out a character and really build out like a romance that I actually care about. And like because like I read romance with Sierra and it's fun, like, you know, it's a brain break. You don't have to think too hard, and there's some that are much better than others, but like this felt like I was like watching a movie and like letting it unfold, because you have the action, you have the romance, and you have this, like, you have, she escapes and then he has to save her, and then he escapes and then she has to save him, and then you have like all these different things that are happening, and then they meet up and then they fight, but then they get back together, and then but like the thing, like one of my biggest trope pet peeves is like when a guy gets, or a gal gets, something like bad happens to them and then they get super moody, and then for the next 200, 300, maybe even a book, they're like this really pissed off, angry person.
Yeah.
And so when I read like the abuse scene, and then I was like, oh no, like we're going down this road. And we went down it for a few, a couple of pages, but the way that Diana wrote it was so fascinating because it didn't dwell so much on Jamie. It more so took the point of view of Claire and the surrounding people and how each person in their own way was trying to help Jamie. And, you have, what is it? Murtaugh,
yeah.
Murtaugh. They're like trying to coax his best friend to come out. And you have like the monks that are praying over him. And then you have Claire who just keeps trying to go in, even though he keeps like shooing her out. And so I think like you have that trope, but instead of it just being like a moody like 300 pages of like I'm gonna get revenge, it was so much more complicated, and it was so much more like, oh, this is an actual human that's going through this, and this is actual humans that are trying to help him out of it, even though it is far removed from what any of us could have imagined, and any of us could have lived through. It just felt so much more human. And so I think it's just she's a powerful writer. And again, her research really comes through, and that, yes, she wrote a smutty romance like about the Highlands that is quite ridiculous in parts and quite ridiculous overall, but like it works because it's well researched.
Yeah. I will say, I mean, this is kind of a spoiler for the TV show, but kind of not. Like the TV show definitely lingers on Jamie's abuse more than the book does. Like they kind of give him more of a like PTSD thing in the TV show, which I think is kind of valid because, to be honest, like the book handles it well, but also by the end of the book has him kind of spick and span and fine, which I don't think is totally real. Like I don't know that he would have sex with Claire that quickly after he'd been sexually abused in that way, but like I get why it happens at the end of the book. But like I don't know, my favorite scene in the book is when she's setting his hand, because I think that like it's such a display of who she is as a character that she's just able to zero in on this thing and accomplish it. And it's also so much evidence of the, like, again, the research that Diana did. Like, okay, if this was a war nurse, if these were the times that she was in, how would she handle this? How would she take this man's broken hand and set it and make it alive again? But also, like, it's such a demonstration of their intimacy as a couple, because even in this moment where this person actively is pushing people away and can't handle reality and is not even like alive fully, she's there and she's still like giving herself, and he is like accepting of it. And I think it's a really like, it's a scene that's so emblematic of like why the book works, because you're invested in it for the characters, but you're also invested in it because it's like genuinely interesting to learn how someone would set a hand. So it's like, it's that kind of, for me, sums up so much of why I ended up really caring. Was just like, okay, if someone can talk me through how to like unbreak a hand in the 1700s while also being sexy, I'm in.
Honestly, though, kind of slid past John Randall of it all.
Oh God, I know. We should get into it.
But yes, and this is how I'll segue into it. Not very smoothly, as you can tell. But John. So the villain of this book, John Randall, I think is probably like one of the best villains I've read, because of the fact that he is, and you kind of see it more in the show, but you get it in the book too, but like he is an exact replica of Frank.
Yes.
And so you have like, because I think John Randall on his own, if he didn't look like Frank, if he was just like this random dude, like he would be almost like too over, like you're just like, this guy's the worst, like he's just abusive, he's just like Oh my god, he is the worst and abusive and the worst. But like, you have this weird, complicated nature of Claire, who is like, I slept with that man. I like married that man. I love this man. And you have this scene where they're talking after they like go with the British Army, and they're like,
the British are coming.
Yeah, and they're like talking with, and Claire's talking with them, and then she comes back, and it's just her and John Randall, and he's telling her the story of him just whipping the crap out of Jamie, and you see his true colors, and you see like he is just so far, he's just lost every single shred of humanity. Yet you have Claire looking at him, and you have that like shred of like, this is my husband's ancestor, and like my husband is this academic, this like caring, this gentle, this man. And like, even her comparing Frank to Jamie, like Frank is much more like no calluses on his hands, he's got like the rower's body, he's just like this very soft human.
Yeah.
And you have this compared to this John Randall, who is as hard as you can be.
Well,
and
sorry.
No, you're fine. But I was just like, it's such a phenomenal way to write a villain, because you can go so hard in how brutal he was, yet you still have that tie back to Frank, and I think it makes it that like that complicated nature that you need for a character this way, that is like this brutal, this terrible, this awful.
It's very interesting too, because the book starts with Frank going into his ancestry and talking about John Randall as his ancestor, and then Claire meets him later down the line, and it's that really amazing question, right, that like every history nerd has, which is like, yeah, these people are fascinating to learn about, but what if I had to actually have dinner with this person, and what if I had to actually like encounter them? And I think John Randall is probably the best example in this book of how the 1700s differ from the 1900s. And I think that the choice to make Jamie's back such a like important theme throughout the book, like this person who is willing to suffer so much and will not give up at the cost of possibly his life. It's really harrowing. And I think John Randall as a person, it's like he's emblematic of this army that colonized these people and forced them into a country they did not want to be. And just it's horrifying to watch him think that he can brutalize Scots and brutalize women and brutalize everyone around him to form into this warped sense of reality that he has. And the added element of him being juxtaposed with this person who is his, kin, and this very kind, like sort of academic, shy person. It's really fascinating because it's I mean, and honestly, like, not to be dramatic about it, but I do think it's kind of a very original perspective that I haven't really read about a lot in books, which is like, who are your ancestors? What did they do? Why are you here now? What did they have to do for you to be here now? Because a lot of the world has been really fucked up in how it's been created. And chances are someone who you're related to has been responsible for hurting or killing another individual at the expense of their country or their land.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really intense thing to reckon with. So what if you had to reckon with that face to face? What would you do? It's a really interesting question. Like, how does your humanity extend? And I mean, it gets way more interesting in books 2/season 2, but I won't talk about it further.
No, that's behind the paywall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Diana just did such a phenomenal job of answering that question in a way. And being like, what is the worst case scenario? Like what your ancestor would be.
Yeah, what if your ancestor was the worst person ever?
Yeah, but you also get like that interesting view of, they're doing research on him, and they're like, wow, he was like a war general. He was like, fighting for this, and oh my gosh, and like, or like a war captain and all this stuff. And you have like Frank doing that research on him. And then when you meet him, it's like the things you are romanticizing are the things that just make him brutal.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating to like see how the history has turned.
Well, it's interesting because like when I first started studying history in my undergrad, like a big thing that they talked about was like, why do you think that history for so long has been told from the perspective of the winners and the heroes? And like, who are those people really? Because we think of these quote unquote great men, which I think now more than ever is being analyzed and shown that they are not really great people, that in fact they were often really awful people. But he's the ultimate example of that. It's like, this is this person who in the history books has been written as this sort of like admirable general who really did a lot for England and really like unified Scotland with England, and in reality was just using his position to hurt and kill and make others suffer at the expense of quote unquote England. And it's like, we sit here and we learn about so many people, and we go to museums and we see portraits of so many people and we read about so many people, but these people ultimately were real people and lived real lives and did things that you probably wouldn't have agreed with. Yeah. And so it's really interesting to have to reckon with this person who I'm looking at and talking to is responsible for the way that I live my life in a small way. He fought for my country to look the way that it does and for us to have the customs that we do. And yet he's brutal and horrifying. And so what does that say about the country that I grew up in and the values that I hold? Like, it's making Claire confront. And I think, honestly, it's kind of why Diana has her stay in the past. It's like she's all of a sudden confronted with the reality of what living in England in the 1940s is created from. And maybe she doesn't like that. And maybe she wants to fight for something different that would allow for more people to have independence and their lives again.
Yeah. Yeah, you have that all tied back to like her, at least especially with the show, but you have her tied back to like looking in that mirror, seeing that vase and being like, I can finally buy a vase because we finally have a house after fighting years and being separated from my husband and seeing war and seeing pain. And then you're transferred back into this world where, again, you're fighting that war, and you know that the next, like, that's what's crazy, is that next year, like, shit's gonna go down. And, like, war's gonna break out. And, like, that is just unfathomable. Like, to have that knowledge and be like, next year's gonna be wild. Like,
well, it's like, so the question that all of us have asked ourselves, which is like, it's the question of like people who are like, oh, well, I would go back and kill Hitler, or like I would go back and I would like find the person who was shooting Martin Luther King, and like, like things like that, where it's like, if you actually had the opportunity to make change, would you be brave enough to do so? And would you choose to do it? Because the life that you lived may not look the same, but you have the potential to create a better one. And I think it's a really intriguing question of like, what's the way to go here? Because is your life as it was valuable enough that you're willing to like watch so many people die and have their lives destroyed? I mean, I think the answer would be no.
I don't know if I could face what or like, I don't know if I would be brave enough to like risk what would actually happen.
Yeah.
Like, what would the new future look like?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I
Fascinating
don't
questions.
know. It's just another interesting question that Diana Gabaldon asked us.
Yep. Well, I love it. Let's end on an existential question because that's way too fun.
Yes.
So, final ratings.
Final ratings.
Do you want me to go first, or do you want
I think
to go
that
first?
you should go first.
Yeah. It's a big old sigh. I gave it a 5 out of 5. No fault. I'm sorry, but like, I wrote in it. I was like thinking like, I think I should give it like a 4, and then I was like, you know what? Any author who can make me read an 850-page book like it was a 150-page novella deserves a 5 out of 5. Like, this shit, like, I love the characters, I love the plot. I think, like you said, it has this touch of realism, this like touch of humanity, this touch of like existential questions, of faith, of love, of like, do you touch the future, do you not, like, of your ancestors. I just think like it's such a deeper book than just this smutty Highlander historical fiction romance that I love, but that it just added that extra level. And since it's the first book in a series, I will ask you the same question, but would you read the rest of the series based on this first book? Absolutely. I would. I'm going to thrift books and I will buy the next book in this series because I'm just invested in the characters. I want to know what happens, and I will say I hate the trope of like, I'm pregnant, but interested to see what a baby in this type of life will look like. So
yeah,
I'm here. I just loved it. I loved reading it. I love the experience. I'm giving it a 5 out of 5.
I love it. Can I make one other point very quickly that I forgot that I was going to talk about? I just really, really quickly want to touch on the girl who Jamie kind of has a fling with before Claire.
Oh yeah,
I do not remember her name. It's something Gaelic, or I'm sorry, Gaelic. Because fun fact, if it's Scottish, it's Gaelic, and if it's Irish, it's Gaelic. But yeah, the more you know.
I want to say it's like Larry or Larry.
It's not Larry.
Larry. Sorry.
But I love the idea of it, so let's call her Larry for right now.
Okay, Larry.
Larry. But I do just want to make a brief comment on her because I think that it's very emblematic of Diana wrote her in because that is what a average woman in that era would have been. And Claire has this experience and has this knowledge because she was allowed to have that in her era. And that had she been alive in the 1700s and grown up in it, she wouldn't have been given the same knowledge. She wouldn't have been given the same opportunity. And I think that the juxtaposition of both is very interesting because this one girl has a lot of beauty and youth, but she has none of the intelligence that is offered to Claire. And it's a really, I don't know, I just find it a fascinating commentary of like these two very different people and why one of them was not given what the other has purely because of what she existed in.
Yeah. And even the hardening of Claire, that hasn't happened to Larry.
Yeah, to Larry. Anyway, side note.
No, love it. I'm glad you added that. Very fascinating.
Thank you. But I'm going to give this book a 4 out of 5. I really liked it. I'm very invested.
That's high for listeners if you've ever read a book with Ella.
Yeah, true. I actually I'm toughy, but
especially fiction.
Especially fiction. But I think that she was committed to her characters. She was committed to the research. She was committed to telling a fully thought out story. And I really respected that. And yeah, it went quick. Like, you know, the sex scenes were sexing it up. The history scenes were historying it up. The action scenes were actioning it up. Like she got through those very long pages. But I think it was just too long. Like even though it went fast, I really could have done with like 200 less pages and it would have been a 5 out of 5 for me. Because there are just aspects of it that I just didn't need or I didn't care about as much. And I felt like they were just drawing away from the central plot line. And I didn't get invested in any B storylines as much. So I think in an ideal world, it would be 200 pages less. And that's why I'm giving it a 4. I think it's a
Fair.
great book that's just too long.
It's so fair. Well, let's get into pairings. So, cocktails, TV shows, books, movies that might pair well with today's book, Outlander. Start with a drink.
You want me to go?
I did Rhenish wine because that's what they're drinking.
Oh, yeah, baby. I mean, what am I going to do other than whiskey? It has to be whiskey.
No, it has to be whiskey.
Just a side note, the guy who plays Jamie on the TV show, Sam Heughan, does a show with the guy who plays, I think, Dougal.
Dougal,
Yeah, with Dougal. And they just, like, tour Scotland and drink whiskey. And that's, like, the whole show. And it's not my pairing, but it is a really fun way to make you be like, maybe I like whiskey. And I still don't like whiskey. But it is a Scottish thing.
Men in kilts.
Men in kilts.
I was going to say I have a love-hate relationship with whiskey. It's veering more on love. It's just, I go to like drink it like they do in the shows, and you're just like, smooth. Real smooth. And you're like, how? You're like, I can't.
I love it if I can't taste it.
Yeah, the only whiskey that I can drink like smooth, like sip it, is like a peanut butter whiskey, and that doesn't count.
Yeah, I mean the Scots would be appalled, Jenna.
They would be appalled. It's okay. TV show.
Okay, Game of Thrones.
That's good. I almost did that one.
Game of Thrones is the one other fantasy thing in my life that has made me fully invested, and I have never read the books, so I can't speak to them. But that show, I mean, obviously until the last season, the real ones know, is brilliant. And it is just like, it really makes you grounded in a totally absurd, fantastical world because of the performances and because of the writing. And, you know, I mean, what more can I say than the Red Wedding? Like, it just is a cultural masterpiece at this point, and everyone should see it at some point in their life.
Absolutely. I did Rain. This is one I've used before, but I felt like it fit. So it's late 16th century France. So
not allowed.
A little bit off.
Not allowed.
But the reason I chose it was because it follows Mary, Queen of Scots. She tries to assimilate into the French court. And I think like her journey is kind of following Claire's in the sense of she's, you know, foreigner coming into this court where she doesn't know anyone. People are out to get her. They want her power. They want, they want to make sure that she doesn't take over the throne. Yet, you know, spoiler alert, she does.
Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well.
No, it doesn't for anyone involved. But you just have this strong female character who's just trying to enact change in a land that she doesn't quite know. And, you know, it's Mary, Queen of Scots. So, Scott.
R.I.P. Mary, Queen of Scots. You were beheaded too soon.
Too soon, too young.
I'm going to do the 2022 adaptation of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Starring...
You already did that one.
Did I really? I'm doing it again.
Or maybe Sierra did it. Sorry. Continue.
I don't feel like I did it. Maybe I did. I'm a little bit obsessed with this movie. So maybe I did, but that's fine.
Been Sierra. Sorry. We'll cut that.
Emma Corrin and Jack O'Connell. Emma Corrin, famously the first iteration of Diana in The Crown, and Jack O'Connell, famously Cook from Skins, for anybody who's been a Skins fan. But I don't know, it's one of those things where, again, it's like this classic romance novel. To be fair, this was written in the 20s, so got some years on Diana. But it's one of these things where I kind of went into it being like, oh, this is going to be cheesy. it's going to be like a classic English romance. And I don't know, the way that this adaptation works. First of all, the sex scenes are great. I'm just going to throw that out there. But second of all, Jenna's giving the yes sign. Second of all, I think that the way that they give these characters a sense of loneliness and love within each other is really admirable. And it's kind of this fantastic story of these two people who are so lonely, who at first find solace in each other, but then realize that they're actually in love with each other. And I think it's kind of reminiscent of Claire and Jamie, in that Claire and Jamie are two people who marry each other not because they necessarily love each other, but because it's out of convenience and necessity at first, and come to really love one another. And I think that Lady Chatterley's Lover has similar themes. And I also think, like, look, we're humans. Sex is a point of togetherness for many people. And I think it's really interesting to read this book that was written at a time when sex was even more taboo than it is now, and show how intimacy, physical intimacy, can be a source of connection for people who, I don't know, are very isolated. And lol, that's also 1700 Scotland. So that's my draw.
Yeah. Hashtag let's talk about sex, baby.
Hashtag you and me.
My book is also a subtle plug to an episode we have recorded before.
Oh my god, I think we're going to say the same thing. Go on.
Kindred.
Yep, we were going to say the same thing.
Yep. You have the time travel. You have the ancestors. You have the phenomenal main character. You have the character building, the world building. Instead, you have, instead of going to 18th century Scotland, you have our main character in Kindred going to colonial America, Maryland.
The colonial South.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting question. Why is Kindred sci-fi and this fantasy? Same
I don't know. Question. We'll put it out to our audience, see if they can answer it. Because that's, yeah. Huh. I never thought about that.
Go on.
Well, now I'm stuck. But anyways, yeah. Linking to the episode in our show notes, so you can go and listen to that one right after this one. Very similar themes, though. So
similar themes. I would say that Claire, as a white English woman, gets to bone a hot Scottish guy and kind of, yes, be tormented at some stages, but really overall be pretty chill. Whereas the main character in Kindred is a black woman who has to assimilate into a life of slavery while also surviving. So very different themes, I would say, but similar in plot.
Sorry. Plot. Yeah. No, you're right. It's yeah, Kindred's a little more
Sorry, that was so funny. No, but you are right.
Kindred is a little bit more hardcore for our main character, who loses an arm.
Yeah, so. Kindred is, I would say, like, forcing America to sort of confront its racist past, whereas Outlander's sort of like, Jacobites are here, but like, we're having sex amongst the grass.
Yeah, it's more like a funny little time.
Yeah.
Having a funny little time with Jacobites.
It's so funny. It's actually crazy to think about the fact that, like, this is when I get nerdy, because it's like the Jacobite rebellion happened, and then like a century later, like, the gold rush happened. Like, what are we all talking about? Like, what are we all talking about?
Bro. Oh god.
Read Kindred, though. That was gonna be my book recommendation. It's so good, and Octavia Butler is amazing. And we had such a great time reading that book, and oh my god, I really could talk endlessly about it, but we already did. So go listen to the episode.
Movie. This one came out of left field for me.
Oh yeah, you didn't do your movie.
Yeah. Wait, did you do your movie?
Yeah, Lady Chatterley's Lover.
Wait, what was your book?
Kindred.
Oh, got it. Okay, we both did. You just went movie. Got it. You went rogue.
I went rogue. Sorry. I
I'm
just
sorry,
Game
I
of
wasn't
Thrones,
following.
and then
It's
fine.
Great. This will be a fun edit. So my movie is Brave, the animated classic from 2012.
Merida.
Merida is so good. It's one of my favorites. She's my favorite Disney princess. I don't care what you say.
What's her big line? I know what it is. Ready? If you had the chance to change your fate, would ya?
It's so good.
What's that movie even about?
It's set in the Scottish Highlands, if you were wondering.
Yeah.
But it's about Merida, whose father is the head of a clan. So you have the clans that are there. And so she must take a husband from another clan to forge a partnership, but she does not want to marry. She doesn't want to wear a dress. So she goes off into the woods. And she ends up meeting a witch who turns her mother into a bear.
Right.
And then she has to turn her mother into a human again.
In a way, it's kind of like Brother Bear and Outlander married each other.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen Brother Bear and wondered, why isn't this more Scottish?
And we just found our pull quote for the episode.
If you had the chance to change your fate, would ya?
It's just perfection. It's just perfection. The album, the theme song that she's writing and like shooting the arrows to, it's just so good.
I'm sorry, but is it not? But it's just not. Sing me a song of a love. Sorry, Merida has nothing on the Outlander theme song.
This was us chatting about Outlander.
On that note, we didn't even say, but like, watch the Outlander TV show.
It's good. Yeah. It's if you want a word for it, if you don't even want to read the book, watch the show.
Watch the show. Watch Sam Hewen's butt.
I know. I was like, it's showtime. We might get full frontal, and then
we didn't, but we got so close.
So close, so many times. I just love his giddy little smile when he was like,
dude, he's so fire. It's redonkulous.
Well, tune in next month as we'll review.
We're reading Bell Hooks next month. It's a different energy completely.
Bell Hooks, all about love.
Yeah, so we're sort of like going from Scottish porn to kind of like a deep dive into like why human beings love and how human beings love. So join us then.
So join us if you like this episode. Not sure you'll like the next one.
Yeah, really different vibes.
Bye now.
Bye.